Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the latest album from DJ Khaled called Grateful. But first let's talk about collaboration, which if you're looking to cross over in mainstream radio, especially these days, is kind of essential. Now, to some extent this has always been somewhat true when it comes to modern pop music, especially in hip-hop with the omnipresent featuring credit. But when you consider how many of the acts in the top 10 right now are group acts where cohesion becomes a major question, well, I can tell you, as of right now, you're looking at about 7 out of 10 of them. And that's ignoring the Stormzy remix of Shape of You by Ed Sheeran, while counting that Kendrick remix of Mask Off that really gave that song a second wind and makes it work, at least for me. And while I have been quick to highlight how these collaborations have paid some really stunning dividends for acts like, say, Calvin Harris, let's get real. The act that has always stood as the marketer and hype man over being more of a producer or even a rapper has always been DJ Khaled, which with 2 singles in the top 5 right now, it's pretty much at the top of his fame. And with the release of the album, probably will have a shot at sending one of those songs to number 1, despite only producing just over half the songs on that last album. An album which at last count has over 30 collaborating verses and artists and stretches nearly 90 minutes. Now the problem with overloading and overlong collaboration records like this is that there's nearly always too much bloat and just not enough high points to obscure some gaping flaws. It was one of the biggest problems behind Major Key last year, and if anything I expected it to get worse here without any Kendrick Lamar verse to save any songs. But okay, with all of that, what did we get from Grateful? This was a pretty weird listen, to the point where after the first few records that came to mind after getting through this double album a couple of times was The Documentary 2 and The Documentary 2.5. Now granted, it's not as good as either of those albums, but it oddly seems to have a similar arc. A first disc that's brighter, flashier, more glitzy, more commercially accessible, and then a second disc that definitely hits greater highs, but also some deeper lows, and pretty much sounds nothing like the first disc in terms of its style and production. It's also the point where DJ Khaled didn't provide as much of his own production, and you can definitely tell, because it's got a lot less cohesive points, and also is a pretty inexcusable low point after Billy Ocean that only serves to emphasize this project was too long and too sloppy to earn that length. So is it better than Major Key? Well, really, it's barely passable, so make of that what you will. And here's the thing. DJ Khaled is not really an album artist. I've accepted that. And while he tries to string together some tangential connection to his infant son across his entire album, culminating in the most kid-friendly hip-hop song since The Fresh Prince on I Love You So Much featuring Chance the Rapper, that features both reciting the alphabet and identifying parts of one's face like the nose and ears, deep down DJ Khaled is here to curate a selection of singles and collaborations, and they really are only as good as the artist behind them. Hell, the songs where there's only really one artist, they feel a little bit out of place. I've already talked on Billboard Breakdown about how To The Max just doesn't really do much for me, especially as Drake seems pretty tuned out by it. But then you have the reggae artist SZA trying and failing to sing through the auto-tune on I'm So Grateful. It's really not a good way to start off the album. And then you have Mavado crooning his way through another closing track that just falls incredibly flat for me, just like it did on Major Key. Hell, go to Major Bag Alert by Migos and effectively sounds like a pretty decent Migos song, especially as DJ Khaled didn't even produce it. The one quasi-solo song I actually kind of liked on this was the interlude from Belly, mostly because his verse was a little bit more colorful against a pretty likable, glossy, more soulful beat, although that abortion line felt weird and I think even he knew it. But again, DJ Khaled didn't produce this either, so it's really only here because of Belly praising him, I guess? And if so, it doesn't help how egocentric and bloated this record feels unnecessarily. But okay, fine. You're here for the collaborations and the singles that are distinct or interesting. And there are definitely a few of them. I've already talked about Wild Thoughts with Rihanna, and Bryson Tiller is a pretty terrific pop song on Billboard Breakdown, mostly through the reuse of that Maria Maria sample from Santana. But there are some pretty terrific samples across this project that form the background of some pretty good collaborations, like between Nicki Minaj and Alicia Keys on Nobody with the gospel swell, the thicker drums and the bass, or the rich glossy piano and synth sample from Jay-Z of all people behind Billy Ocean that pairs together Fat Joe and Raekwon, and it's slick as hell. It sounded pretty good. Or especially the soul sample behind Good Man, which pairs up Jadakiss with Pusha T, and it's easily the best song here in terms of bars, punchlines, and content. On the flip side though, you've got Pull a Caper, which features a minor shifted sample of Phil Collins's Against All Odds behind a hook from Kodak Black and a really thin, oscillating synth that really set my teeth on edge that Rick Ross couldn't even save that well. And that's something that needs to be noted here, because there are a couple guest stars that show up multiple times that work for DJ Khaled, and Rick Ross is one of them, mostly because his brand of decadence fits pretty well against DJ Khaled's style of production. And then there are the artists who don't, and unfortunately Travis Scott is one of them. He also shows up 4 times, and frankly he's only passable on Don't Quit, which is effectively a modern Calvin Harris reject featuring Calvin Harris himself, and sadly his brand of auto-tune singing and not particularly interesting content in bars just doesn't mesh all that well with DJ Khaled. And neither does Future, for the record, who shows up 5 times, all on the second disc, and he's either over-singing or on songs like Iced Out My Arms completely checked out and worthless, with probably the worst moment coming through with his collaboration with Young Thug on Whatever, where it just sounds awful, which is only barely saved by a mostly amusing 2 Chainz verse. And that should also be pointed out as well. There's no song as atrocious on this album as there was like Pick These Hoes Apart on Major Key, but that's more because of Hail Mary verses from MCs that just save a couple of these songs from being outright awful, which is most blatant on Iced Out My Arms when T.I. of all people goes opposite this utterly flat production from Metro Boomin, a horrible hook from Future, and only so-so verses from Migos and 21 Savage, and then T.I. actually showcases a way to deliver a mumble rap flow and delivery with some actual charisma. Who would have known? Similar case for the big single I'm the One, where Chance the Rapper and Quavo basically saved this song from Lil Wayne just completely going off script in the worst way possible, completely defying the theme of the song. Or when Nicki Minaj shows up on I Can't Even Lie to save a pretty bad Future song effectively from itself, when even Future is trying to come up with excuses for his own incoherence on some of these songs, he's delivering a really bad set of performances. He's not on his A game here. But that's the thing, there are not that many artists that sound comfortable over DJ Khaled's brand of too slick, slightly pop or gospel-inspired opulence. I mean, Rick Ross sounds fine over it, as does Nicki Minaj, and pretty much most of the old school MCs that are less dependent on autotune, and yet nowhere is that more contrast, and that is more apparent than in It's Secured, where you have Travis Scott on the hook opposite 2 verses from Nas. And yeah, they're good verses, cause it's Nas and he can knock this out and in this more conscious side of brag rap pretty much in his sleep. But incidentally, probably not a good thing that you call back to Nas' album Done that was dropped on Major Key last year, and that record still isn't out yet, Nas. But his presence also highlights a change in focus, because this is a lighter, less overtly lyrical record than Major Key was, with its verses from Kendrick and J. Cole and Busta Rhymes, which has to be the reason he trapped on these mostly generic trap bangers on the second disc that he didn't even produce and don't fit at all with this style. Sure, they'll probably cross over, they'll do well on the radio, but they're not all that interesting or good. But you know what? I guess we can't assign too much blame for DJ Khaled for all this. After all, the album's executive producer was his infant son, Assad, who according to Khaled was responsible for picking each song and vibe, and apparently if he pooped or threw up, those were super blessings. And while there's a very big part of me that feels like DJ Khaled's whole act and shtick is an extended performance art piece that the mainstream public really needs to get sick of a hell of a lot faster, I'm not gonna deny that he makes it very clear that he loves his kid and will probably turn him into the most spoiled child alive, but again, it's his choice, it's his kid. But in a twisted way, it does allow this album to make a certain amount of sense, designed by a baby that doesn't have a defined sense of object permanence yet, into a bloated, indulgent mess that doesn't have any sense of real cohesion. I'm not denying that there aren't a few good songs or verses. I have to ask, is it really worth the surrounding 80+ minutes of mediocre to just flat out bad music to really get them? In my opinion, this is a light 5 out of 10, even then I'm feeling generous, and only really recommended if you bought into the whole DJ Khaled thing right now. Otherwise, check out the singles, maybe pick up Good Man and maybe Billy Ocean and Nobody, and yeah, skip the rest. Trust me on that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine, hell, it's DJ Khaled, and from what I've heard, this doesn't have great buzz, but I got the poll up there for all you to tell me how wrong I am on that front. Beyond that, I've got the link to actually buy the album if you're curious in the description below. If you guys have anything for me to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week, the higher tier contributors get to add albums or even movies to said schedule. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.